Today's show is brought to you by TestCube. Are flaky tests slowing your Kubernetes deployments? TestCube powers continuous, cloud-native testing directly inside your Kubernetes clusters. Seamlessly integrate your existing testing tools, scale effortlessly, and release software faster and safer than ever. Stop chasing bugs in production. Start preventing them with TestCube. Check it out at testcube.io/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios from here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. Another weekend perspective show, and as we roll up to, I guess we're getting into the actual Q4 here, late September. So fall is getting close to being done. I guess I think that's right. September 21st is not the beginning of sort of winterish. Maybe I got that wrong. Anyways, it's mid-September, mid to late September. Things are good. Hope you're all doing well. And this is one of those shows where I apologize to everybody up front. And I've mentioned this a few times in the show. If you're listening, I have a just unbelievable travel schedule. And I don't mean unbelievable in like a great way. I just mean unbelievable in terms of the volume of travel I've got over, well, what's been the last couple of weeks, and then starting actually this week through, I think, mid to late November, almost into Thanksgiving. I think I am traveling every single week and many weekends. And so I am not by any means trying to shortchange anybody on the weekend perspectives. I am trying to give you good topics and interesting topics, and sometimes just the timing of them sort of cram them in. So I apologize for that. Again, I'm not apologizing for trying to give you bad shows or lesser shows than maybe you expect, but the travel has been a lot. It is just causing some weirdness in terms of when we publish. So apologize for those of you that like to get up on a Saturday morning, or on a Sunday morning and listen to it first thing. I know I haven't had those out as much, so apologize for that. But anyways, want to dive into just connecting a couple of dots, kind of getting back to sort of the origin of weekend perspective, connecting the dots. Kind of 2 points I want to hit on today, and really they are a couple of observations and sort of things, repeating patterns I'm beginning to see around smart people and AI. And I want to connect the dots between maybe why smart people love AI and why smart people hate AI, and maybe why those two things continue to repeat themselves. So we'll get to that right after the break. We know that AI helps us work faster and more efficiently. But what if it could also help us live longer, healthier lives? We want to introduce you to Interconnected, a fascinating new podcast about the tech behind the tech. This week, they dive into the revolution that AI is bringing to medicine. In episode 2, world-renowned cardiologist Dr. Eric Topol and decentralized pioneer Jim Nasser explain how AI is enhancing disease prevention, supercharging personalized care, and giving patients control of their data. Listen to Interconnected today, wherever you get your podcasts. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I want to connect a couple of dots. I'm going to kind of go, kind of old school weekend perspective, where, the point of these things was really just connecting a couple of dots and trying to draw some lines between them, maybe run some red string between them. It's not really a conspiracy, but just sort of being like, it's interesting that these two things are somewhat related, somewhat connected. And what I was thinking about was, I've been thinking about kind of AI adoption. I've been thinking about AI funding. I've been thinking about sort of, where people are moving from an AI perspective and so forth. Because, this is anytime we have transitions from sort of one era to the next, a lot of times what we see is, oftentimes people from one era, people that have a background in one era, maybe it's in cloud, or maybe it was in security, or maybe it was in, application development, whatever it might be, tend to, if they've been doing that one for a while, oftentimes they pick up the new thing. And, they become sort of the early adopters, early engagers, evangelists, if you will, sometimes for the newer technology. And we've seen that somewhat with AI. But there's really kind of two things that I'm sort of curious about. And they fall into these two buckets. One is, I don't think there's ever been a time in which being smart about this data science, AI, space, right? Essentially, we've had this continuum of stuff that was, there was sort of the older AI winter stuff, which was very much predictive AI, which obviously very smart data scientists, but you didn't hear about them making billions and billions of dollars. Obviously, there are a few of those. Even if you go back to like the SaaSes of the world and the Jim Goodnights of the world, making a lot of money, from things that were really just statistics, if you will, predictive statistics and advanced, sort of advanced math stuff. But we weren't hearing about that necessarily. We were hearing about things like Google Brain and Google DeepMind and, some of the big labs and so forth. But again, people weren't funding them at huge levels. They weren't monetizing them at huge levels. There was a lot of research that was going on, and they were researchers, and those people enjoyed being researchers and so forth. But it now feels like if you are in that category of people, and I don't necessarily know how to categorize that category of people, because in some cases, you could be the CEO of Scale AI, and essentially your entire company is getting bought because somebody perceives you as being really, really smart. You could be the founder and couple of key engineers of Windsurf, and somebody is buying you because you are really, really smart. We are seeing things like the organization at OpenAI doing a purely private, sort of funding round in which all of the internal employees are then able to sell their stock at the $500 billion level. So those 300, 400, 500 people or whoever super smart people at OpenAI are able to get very, very rich without the rest of the marketplace having any access to those sort of things. So there are a number of people now who are, of the math ilk, of the data science ilk, of the big data ilk, whatever you might be, the AI ilk, who are loving this time right now because the thing that you're working on, which may have been very similar to the thing you were working on 5 years ago, 10 years ago, is now perceived by the marketplace as being fantastically valuable, although people haven't necessarily figured out how to turn that value into profit or into necessarily revenue streams, or at least profitable revenue streams, unless you are NVIDIA or Broadcom or a few companies. But to be of that ilk right now, at least timing wise, it is a fantastic time to be, because there are opportunities for you to become fantastically rich. So your smartness and your timing is perfect at this point in time. And quite honestly, if there's one thing I've learned in this space in the last 25, 30 years or so is, being really smart can be valuable. Being somewhere at the right time is typically infinitely more valuable. And we've seen this from companies that got acquired that you went, how in the world did somebody want to pay that kind of premium? And then literally a year later, that market had collapsed or something along those lines, right? But for right now, there is a cohort of people who are very, very smart, or at least, make other people believe they're very, very smart, who are getting fantastically wealthy. And whether or not that thing that they're working on is going to turn out to be profitable for the bigger company they're working on, whether it's going to be profitable for the people that have invested in them, whether it is an opportunity for the broader market to participate in that profitability and investment and sort of longevity, we will see. But timing wise, this is a fantastic time to be incredibly tied to being a founder and key engineer at those companies. Now, I say that because we're also seeing the flip side of that with all these acquihires, these weird acquihires in which, part of the company gets acquired, the CEO and their cohort of, a dozen people get hired, the rest of the company doesn't. So it's also probably fantastically bad time to be working for an AI startup and not be one of those super smart people, right? You may be really good at your job. You may be the best marketing person you've ever met in your life, and people might give you awards and stuff, but you probably aren't going to get that really big money because a Google or an OpenAI or an AWS has figured out that they don't need to pay for you. They don't need to acquire all of you. They just acquire some of you. And that seems to be perfectly fine to the investors. It seems to be perfectly fine to the founders. It is a select level of smartness that is getting the huge money for this. So, this is a sort of smartness, love and hate situation, right? You can be very smart in sales. You can be very smart in marketing. You could be very smart in all sorts of areas. But if you're not the ones that they want, we're seeing that. Now, the flip side of that is, so, fantastic time, like I said, fantastic time, potentially highly, highly lucrative time to be doing that. And again, this is one of those things in which you might be really smart, but are you smart enough to realize the context that we're in? Because, who knows how long this boom will last as long as it is, right? If you are any sort of student of history, you know that booms don't last forever, but sometimes they last a few years, i.e., Web3 or some of the early crypto stuff. In some cases, the booms that don't necessarily make logical sense, like some of the long-running crypto stuff, or some of the booms that are based on very big things, the gold rush, for example, or how long the cloud native boom went on for a long time while we were at zero interest rates. I mean, there's all sorts of examples of very short-term booms and busts and long-term booms, and then eventual sort of deflations or bubble burstings, whatever those things might be. But the question becomes, are you then smart enough to guess? And again, it's a guess. When the top of that bubble might be, or the top of that burst might be, such that you can cash out at a high level, or do you literally miss it by a day or two? And I can speak from personal, kind of experience, having missed one or two of those by literally a day or two, and sort of knowing when the red flags were going off, and even missing them and so forth. So there are opportunities for the really, really smart to be cashing in. It is a small and finite number of people at this point in time, but it is an interesting opportunity because your smartness and context of understanding the timing of it might be something that allows you to actually be the person or the group that figures out the profitability. If, for example, and this is just a hypothetical, if, for example, the AI boom that we're in right now were to bust because the profitability didn't work out at the current way that things are, similar to what we saw with the internet bubble burst and then the internet exploding after that, once some of the economic variables had sort of rationalized themselves. We talked about that on a show not too long ago. But you may end up being, if you are one of those open AI people that's been able to sell at $500 billion, you might actually be the person or the group of people that creates the next thing, if you're so inclined, right? So that is a cohort of smart people that right now probably love this. The question will be, are they smart enough to figure out that they both love it because the numbers are really big, but they also love it because they can figure out the context, and maybe they're smart enough to figure out what the next wave of this is? Because I think what we're seeing right now is a very early wave. The very early waves typically aren't representative of what the biggest wave will look like as a new trend takes off, right? So, for example, yes, the iPhone was very, very interesting in the beginning of mobile, but the whole mobile thing took off not because the iPhone had a cool touchscreen, but because the iPhone and eventually the Google Store had a marketplace that allowed new applications to be built. And those new applications were the things that drove mobile, right? Whether it was any number of things from, deliveries to, ride sharing to, all sorts of stuff, right? So the first little wave that we're seeing, and again, we're in the first little wave of generative AI, probably doesn't look like what the next big wave of generative AI looks like, assuming that it can become profitable and scalable and all the sorts of things. Now, the other sort of cohort of smart people that I'm trying to connect some dots with here is more user smart people, right? People that are starting to use generative AI, that have been experimenting with generative AI or been playing with it for a couple of years. And there's an interesting thing going on here because, there are the people that are building the technologies, and right now it looks like they are sitting on piles and piles of money and piles of gold and burning through cash. But, it seems like they are in sort of the nirvana of, anything they want, they can go get and they can go build and all those sort of things. The flip side of it is people that are trying to use the technologies, the ones that are trying to figure out, does this stuff make any sense for me? Does this stuff make me any better at my job? Can I solve problems faster? Can I automate away more toil? Can I reduce costs? Can I create better experiences? All those sorts of things. And what's interesting is I feel like, and this is just sort of anecdotal evidence, but I feel like I do get a chance to talk to a lot of smart people, or at least listen to a lot of smart people talk about this. Maybe they all have a podcast, like fools like myself and Aaron and others. Um, but it does feel like there's a sentiment amongst relatively smart people, maybe not PhD level smart people, but very smart people and very accomplished people and very senior people, that what they're interacting with AI, and again, I don't know if this is a subconscious thing or if this is just a haven't mastered it yet, or their level of knowledge for their domain is just really high because they've done something for a long time. There feels like there's a general sentiment. Again, this isn't everybody, but sort of a general sentiment amongst the smarter, more senior people that they're like, AI is fine, right? AI is it's fine, and it sort of can augment what they do. I hear sometimes it talked about as, augmented interns or aggregated interns that, can help them with the jobs they do. But I feel like, for all the fear that exists around AI, will it take my job? Will it, displace my industry? Will it, reduce the value that is perceived of what I do and therefore reduce salaries and all those sort of things? It feels like of the really smart people, and again, most of those that I would kind of classify as really smart are probably more domain smart than necessarily like genius smart. But, domain smarts is very, very valuable commodity to be and to have. It feels like they sort of have interacted with AI. They've got various opinions upon it, whether it was, useful. Maybe a first generation was less useful than the second generation. But, I think they feel like the problems that they tend to solve on a regular basis haven't necessarily been solved before. And however they interact with the AIs, the generative AIs and so forth, I feel like their general perspective is it's fine. It augments what I do. They don't dislike it, but they sort of have a small disdain for the idea that it could just replace their job, right? And maybe it's the disdain for Dario over in Anthropic and his weekly things talking about how, half of all white collar workers or all knowledge workers will get replaced, but yet, he can't prove or show one example of that, but, whatever. But I do feel like there is a certain amount of loathing about the buzz around AI, especially from those levels of smart people and those domain level expert people kind of going, it's fine. It knows about a lot of information, but also, their own individual brain knows a lot about of information. And so what they end up doing is they go, yes, it's a fine tool to help me brainstorm ideas, give me 10 more ideas than I would have come up with in the same amount of time, or, help me validate something, rewrite something, maybe do a bunch of busy work that they wouldn't have done, right? So something they might have given to a junior associate that works underneath them or something. So, I feel like, we have these different ends of the spectrum of sort of love and hate around AI. And if you look at it just from the context of somebody who's very smart, it sort of depends on, are you going to cash out a lot of money on this in which you love this space? Or, are you, I don't want to say like more in the crosshairs, but are you looking at it as like, okay, it's a tool, not a vehicle to sell. And it's fine, right? It's useful, but, is it something that's going to, even if you thought about it as like, hey, could it be my twin, right? Could it do exactly what I do? How much work would it take to do exactly what I do? In which case, either you could get 200% productivity, or you could go, boy, I could make the world believe that I am twice as good as I'm doing, and I'm spending more time on the beach or on the golf course or doing whatever hobby I like to do, whatever it is. You could be playing Dungeons and Dragons, who knows? And I don't think we've seen any number or really any tangible examples of that, right? We hear all sorts of people go, well, I have these agents that go out and they look at my stock portfolio, and that's fine. We've had things that have done that before, but I've sort of yet to see anybody who, again, highlights an agent, a set of tools that just sort of replicates themselves in a way that even if they did it in a positive way, and again, maybe this is a certain amount of like people are doing it and they don't really want to talk about it, because if you were to say, for example, hey, I created a thing that created virtual me, AI me, whatever your domain is, whatever your expertise is, and you said this thing has learned everything that I do in all the ways that I do it, in the ways that your company loves you today for and pays you handsomely to do or perceives you as really smart to do. It's an interesting sort of conundrum. Would you tell anybody that you did that, right? Because on one hand, maybe you want to show off what you built, but would you tell anybody you did that? Because then at that point, the question is, could you do twice as much as what you do? Maybe, right? But would you tell anybody that you're now capable of doing twice as much, or would you just start doing it? Because if you do tell somebody that you've done that, then wouldn't their first inclination be like, well, maybe I don't need you anymore? So we've created an interesting sort of conundrum. And I think about this in the context of my sort of ongoing search for, sort of the killer application, the lighthouse application for AI. And if people are building them, you do sort of wonder, because this has such a personal human engagement or representation, are people going to actually talk about these things? Because in the past, if somebody had been like, I am the best coder and I just created an amazing thing that I wrote with my code, with my algorithm, they would have been talking about it all over the place. They would have been at events and podcasts and all sorts of stuff. But I do feel like this, being smart in AI, you almost want to keep it to yourself. And it might be easier for you to sort of complain about it and give off a perception that, it's not that good. But so now that I think about it, I do start to wonder if really smart people have figured out how to just, replicate themselves, do twice as much work, or have twice as much capacity as they did before, and they keep it entirely to themselves. Because the downside of it, if you have the wrong manager, the wrong perceived person, they happen to look at the credit card bill you use to run up that, to build that thing. Maybe the credit card bill is $20,000, but you're making $200,000. I could get virtual you for 1/10 the price, right? And that sounds sort of silly on its surface because somebody created that. Why couldn't they do that? But that is the way that we've all seen some strange manager perceive something, right? It's just simply dollars and cents in a spreadsheet. So I do think we have an interesting situation, or at least, and again, this may be purely contextual. It may just be the timing that we're in, the first inning, the bottom of the first inning, whatever you want to call it, of how do smart people engage around AI? What is their perception of the value of AI and what AI is doing for them? And I think even for those who are going to make tons and tons of money as the smart engineers at some of these companies, remember that timing and context matters. Maybe the big windfall you could take today allows you to create and fund the bigger thing that you could build in sort of wave 2, which is really where I would expect that we're going to see the really mind-blowing, world-changing, scalable things that we'll see with AI. Or maybe you're just a really smart person with a domain expertise and you just kind of want to keep it to yourself. And the best way to sort of protect yourself by doing that is being a little bit grumpy about, it's not that good. It's not that great. I tried it. That doesn't really do it for me. Maybe that's the best facade to put out right now. Anyways, would love to hear your thoughts on, are you a smart person? What's your perception on AI? What's your thoughts on AI? Let us know. We'd love to kind of get your takes on it. But with that, I'll wrap it up. Talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.